Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach for Defend and Publish. Welcome to episode 53, Strategies for Dissertation Advisors. I wanted to use this episode as a companion episode to our podcast episode 52 last week that was advice for graduate students who need to have tough conversations with their dissertation chairs or advisors. So for this week, we're flipping the script and we are focusing a little bit on what dissertation advisors might need with some strategies for them to see if they can help their dissertation students in a way that makes that relationship productive. And I got this idea, I mentioned this in the last week, but I got the idea because we are hearing so much from graduate students who are struggling with their relationships with their dissertation advisors for all sorts of reasons. And I did talk through some ways that they might work with their advisors more productively last week. But I did want to throw some strategies out to dissertation advisors who honestly might not know how to help some of their students. It's easy to help the students that do the work and bring the drafts on time and have good ideas and work independently and their writing is solid. Those students are a pleasure to work with. I've worked with some doctoral students at my own university, and then in my own program, I direct graduate students who write a thesis. And, even though the stakes are a little bit different at the master's level, those students are a joy to work with. They're fun. You enjoy talking with them about their ideas. They produce the writing. But what do you do with the students who are struggling for possibly lots of different reasons? So today what I want to do is talk through some different things that dissertation advisors can do to support their students. And this is pretty well researched. I've been tracking this all during the fall of 2021. Every time we get a client that comes in that's having some kind of a problem, I try to figure out what kind of category does this problem fall into. And one of the things that I found is it really falls into 4 things that they need from advisors and that they're not getting for some reason. So what I'm going to do is start with talking about the first one that sounds like it's not a problem, but it is. So dissertation advisors, one of the things that many of the students want is they actually want tough love from you. And what they mean by that is not, a dissertation advisor who's, overly critical or mean or, somebody that, maybe is not a comfortable person to work with. But what I mean by that is that many of them come to us because their dissertation advisors are very flexible on when things are due and what they want. And so they'll say things like, oh, you can just give that to me next week. So if maybe a agreed upon deadline was your introductory chapter is due on February 10th, and February 10th comes and goes and the advisor never asks for it or checks, the student says, well, I got away with something, I didn't have to turn it in. And then just more weeks go by and time adds up and more years get stacked on to the dissertation degree. And so many students say that they've got a lot of advisors like that. And advisors, I completely understand this from being a graduate program director myself, and I advise multiple projects. It's really easy to give students another week and say, yeah, go ahead, take another week. I'm swamped too, no big deal. But many of these graduate students are asking for more firm deadlines and, not harsh repercussions when they don't complete, but something that suggests that this is important. I said, and you said that we would have chapter 1 done on this day, and you didn't produce it. What are we going to do so this doesn't happen again? Many of them said they would be more motivated. And yes, it's in some ways a little bit of a negative motivation, but many of them said that they would, if they knew that their dissertation advisor was going to just hold firm to deadlines, they would be more likely to meet them. And isn't that the case with a lot of us about our own manuscripts and our own writing, that if we know that grant deadline is March 1st, no matter what, and they won't take it after March 1st, we're going to get it done by then. And so the graduate students are asking in a kind of a collective fashion that they need those deadlines. So I would say the top 2 reasons, one of the top 2 reasons people come to Defend and Publish, one of them is for accountability, because they're not getting it from somewhere else. Their dissertation advisor doesn't care, or if they're on applying for a job position, and they're trying to get a publication in, there's no accountability there because nobody cares if they don't get that position. So it's one of those things that accountability is something that they need and they're asking for. So if you can set clear boundaries with your students and say that, and this is something I have to tell myself too, I'm definitely not perfect at it. I need to get better at it for sure. But that it is something that they want those boundaries. Another thing that they said that they liked is that when they had dissertation advisors that actually suggested how to go about doing something difficult. So, most of the clients that we get recognize when graduate advisors make all kinds of pieces of advice or comments on drafts. They understand how to do, I would estimate, at least half of those things. But sometimes there'll be comments that will talk about, say, applying a certain framework or a certain theory, or they'll talk about something to do with the methodology that's maybe a little bit more complex. One of the things the graduate students specifically asked for is saying, giving examples or suggestions of how to solve a problem. So with a comment, if you say, I'd really like to see you incorporate the theory of X in your research, if that's the comment, then give them one other piece of that. Like, for example, you might consider using it to introduce the content in chapter 2. Alternatively, I could see a case for using it in your conclusion when you're talking about concept ABC. So just that extra, for example, or you could look in these 3 places as starting points, but just giving them that one extra tweak that gives specific advice. So many of the dissertation students that come through us, particularly the ones that are now starting to turn dissertation projects into articles or books, they have those kinds of things coming from their advisors. But for the ones that are struggling and they really want to complete their dissertation, one of the reasons they're stuck is because they don't know how to do something. So just giving them a suggestion of where to do it, that illuminates how you're thinking about their project. It doesn't mean that they have to do it that way. And that's why I always like to give 2 different ways of possibly doing something, even with the caveat that, hey, these aren't the only 2 ways to do it, but here's 2 places to look. That may be just enough to get that struggling student over the hump of actually addressing the comment instead of ignoring it. Because like undergraduate students, many dissertation students will just ignore something they don't understand, or they'll try to do it on a very superficial level. And as we know, when we're trying to do doctoral dissertations, the superficial won't cut it at this level. So they need those specific suggestions. Another way to do that is to point them to an article that does it well. So a lot of times we have sort of model articles we know are good examples of maybe how someone applies a framework or how a certain type of statistical analysis is carried out. Just even saying, take a look at this article and see how researchers did this particular step. This might give you some ideas how to use yours, but just giving them that extra tweak is one way to make sure that you get the content that you want and the writing's moving forward every week. Another thing that goes along with that is making sure when you're giving feedback to the dissertation students that you're really hitting the most important things. This is something that in rhetoric and composition, the discipline that I hail from, we talk about giving global feedback, meaning the big picture sorts of things before we worry about the smaller nitpicky things. And so in this case, one of the things that's happening with students or clients that are coming to defend and publish, many of them have reams of comments from advisors, but they can't sort through what are the most important things I have to tackle, and it becomes really overwhelming. So we'll have dissertation students spending hours tweaking their APA format, but not getting at, I don't understand what your argument is in paragraph 2. So one of the ways to think about giving feedback is maybe giving a little bit less, but making it more focused and saying, these are 3 things I absolutely have to see in your draft before we can move forward. and not worrying about the other stuff, especially in those first developmental drafts. Lots of the nitpicky things can get cleaned up later. But I think, if you can give those very clear types of suggestions, and sometimes it could be just one suggestion if it has to be labeled or laced all the way through. So, for example, I just looked at a client's work the other day where she was using a term incorrectly, but the way she was using the term set off all kinds of problems with her literature review and all kinds of other areas of the project. So for that dissertation advisor, one of the things I would say is talk to her about that term and talk to her about how it's going to affect the literature review and how it's going to affect this other area of her project, because she can't really go forward or write anything else. And what the problem was with the term is that she had not defined it in the way she was using it. So she wanted to use this very specialized definition, but it wasn't a problem that got caught early enough, and it was buried in a bunch of other feedback. So this would be one time where I would say, we can't do anything else until we fix this one thing. Let's talk about this one thing, and let's meet next week. And so one thing that this might happen, which is sort of like a corollary to this, is that it might mean as a dissertation advisor, you have to have more frequent meetings with your student, but they could be shorter. They could be 15-minute meetings. So somewhere along the way, we've got the standard of having the hour-long meeting with your dissertation advisor every couple weeks or something like that. But honestly, you could knock out 15 minutes with a student on a Zoom or even a quick phone call where you're both looking at a Google Doc or face-to-face in the office, and you get forward progress more quickly. And the student benefits from an extra touch point. So, I'm very sympathetic to many of us that are teaching in graduate programs right now where we're extremely overworked, like everywhere in the universities, and we're covering a lot of different classes. But if there's an opportunity to make less work for yourself, solving some of these bigger picture issues might actually make the writing more pleasurable for you, because it's easy to get frustrated with students when they don't do what we want them to do. And especially in the case of doctoral students, where we're thinking of them as future faculty, they are still students, much, older students, non-traditional students, if we want to call them that, but, they still need the feedback from us as dissertation advisors. So even just saying, just work on this one thing, that can sometimes offer a sense of relief to the student, because if it's something complex and hard, they might be only able to mentally handle that one thing this week while they work on it. And again, that gets back to having deadlines. You could say, we've got 1 week to focus on this thing. Here's some things that we could do to solve this problem. Here's a model to look at. Here's some suggestions. Here's what I need you to do through your draft. Let's do this one thing, and then set up a deadline. And then again, with those deadlines, you might have a better chance of getting them met, which gets back to making sure you've got some tough love happening there. The last one I would say, and this is just a personal thing with me, I've mentioned in many episodes, but my area of research is in faculty productivity, and I'm really interested in how faculty write, how we write for publication. What do we do to make sure that we're able to have a sustainable writing life, meaning we can, year in and year out, put out some articles, put out some books, and I would argue, have a good time doing some of that. And a book I wrote in 2018 called How Writing Faculty Write contains some interviews where I asked faculty specifically about their writing processes. And it was the first book that was like that in our discipline of rhetoric and writing studies. And one of the things that has come out of that is how much I hear from faculty that they really wish that other faculty would talk about how they write. And even more so, and I made this argument in the book, is that graduate students, particularly doctoral students, need to see us as dissertation advisors and faculty members in the departments actually writing, not celebrating a publication, because that hides all of the work that went behind that publication that the graduate student doesn't see. So as a final piece of advice, I'd encourage folks to show how they write. Talk to the graduate students, say, I noticed you're struggling meeting this deadline and you're really having a hard time. Tell me about what you're doing when you have a writing session. When are you making time to write? Tell me a little bit about your habits, and then share with them your own habits. It's not that the student has to copy everything that you do, but it just opens up an alternative way of producing work. I know in that book, I talked through several faculty examples, one of whom is a professor named Cheryl Glenn, who talks about how she, and this was pre-pandemic, so we've got to take it with a caveat, but pre-pandemic, she would write with her office door open, so graduate students could walk by at any time and see her producing scholarship. There are many other examples in that book where faculty were showing graduate students what they do. I know I've taken to myself to having a couple of what I call like study hall sessions with my graduate students that are writing thesis projects. We have some hours in the library. I sit and write, they sit and write. And they see me wiggling around in my chair, looking up when I don't know what it is I want to say next, taking a minute to stretch. But they also see me sitting there and putting in the work of typing and working. And we might have a break, every hour to kind of talk about what we're struggling with or what we're thinking about. But it just makes the writing process less mysterious and more clear, because all the graduate students know a lot of times is that they see other people around them producing the work, but for some reason they're not able to get the work done, particularly on dissertations. So talking with them about how you write and asking them about how they write, you might be able to offer a couple of suggestions, and if for some reason that relationship on the writing side isn't working out, you can certainly always suggest clients come to us, or, they could seek out the Graduate Writing Center on campus. Of course, we're happy to work with them, and we are all PhD trained, but, sometimes you want to send them to a service that they can find on their own campus, and that might be an opportunity. It might be an opportunity to just have a conversation about thinking about a writing plan. Even though this might be outside your purview as the dissertation advisor, you might say, well, let's talk through what you can do. Tell me what you want to commit to, and especially to start our spring semester, that might be another thing to do. So I want to close with this, for dissertation advisors especially. We often offer workshops at Defend and Publish. In our February workshop on February 9th from 12 to 3 Eastern Standard Time is going to be about how to be a dissertation advisor and how to help graduate students with writing specifically with their dissertations. So I know that the spots for that will go probably fairly quickly. So if you're interested in registering for that, we will have a link to Eventbrite in our show notes for where you can get a ticket for that. You can also email me at Christine@Defend and Publish if you want to know more about it. But particularly those of you that have just become dissertation advisors, you never were one before, and now you all of a sudden have graduate students to supervise, when you're supervising their projects. This might be something that you want to do to just see some strategies for how to actually talk to them about writing. I gave you some quick ones for today, but certainly there are many other ways you might approach that. And again, if you're interested, that workshop's on February 9th from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're recording this episode in the spring of 2022. So, I understand if you're listening to it later, the information might be a bit dated, but we also will have the recording available. So if you cannot make that time, you can get the recorded workshop and the templates just by registering. So check out that in the show notes, or contact me at Christine@defendandpublish.com to find out more. Happy writing.